Okay, are we all here? Looks like a lot of people are here. Can you guys all hear me?
Mhm.
All right, so first off, are there any questions about the landfill and wastewater treatment lectures that were posted? Yeah, Jake.
Have you ever been to the wastewater treatment plant in Iowa City? I know you talked about it a couple
I
times.
have, yeah. Yeah, it's
That's really,
normally part of the field trips that we would normally do in this class would be to go to that wastewater treatment plant, go to the landfill at in either Cedar Rapids or Iowa City, and the drinking water plant in Iowa City. They're all pretty state of the art. The
Um,
when I
sorry.
when I first moved to Mount Vernon in 2000, they had an old wastewater treatment plant that was built in the 40s, something like that, and it didn't actually have digester tanks the way sort of everybody does now. Instead, what happened was the water would go in and would get sort of screened and filtered and stuff, and then it would go up to the top of these little look like silos, and the idea was that the water would get sprinkled in and it would kind of trickle down over these little layers, these mats where there are the organisms living inside. And by the time it came out, it was supposed to be cleaner. But the system was so overwhelmed. It was designed for a very, very small town. And Mount Vernon, and water use has grown considerably since 1940. So that the water that was being taken in by the wastewater treatment plant really wasn't being cleaned very well. And I don't know if you guys have ever been down there, but if you've ever seen the wastewater treatment plant in Mount Vernon now, it's kind of right out by the golf course, if you know where that is, just off of Highway 30, southeast of town. But there's a little creek that runs by it, and the wastewater from the plant was being dumped, as it always does, into the creek. And the creek was kind of gray. Literally, it was kind of coated with this gray film, and there wasn't much living in it. And it was just because the water wasn't being cleaned up enough in the wastewater plant. And when I don't know when it was, 15 years ago or so, they tore it down and they built this new one, which has a much, much bigger capacity. And once they switched over, the stream came back to life. It was incredible. And it was just because the quality of the water that was being released was so much improved. Likewise, when I moved to Iowa City for the first time for graduate school in 1995, the water here, the drinking water, was terrible. They took it out of the river mostly, and they had just chlorinated the hell out of it. And it didn't taste good. It didn't smell good. I mean, wasn't bad for you, but it was gross. We used to buy those big jugs of water for drinking in the house. And then, I don't know what, again, like 5-8 years ago, Iowa City invested in this really state-of-the-art drinking water plant, and it just improved the taste of the water overnight. It's pretty amazing.
Did they have issues with flooding or runoff when there was a rain?
In Iowa City or Mount Vernon?
Either one, because I know back at home, for me in Burlington, there was mention of that at some point. They had issues with rainwater and stuff.
For sure, yeah. So the Department of Natural Resources occasionally allows waivers to communities that are being hit by floods. So the idea is that the only water that's supposed to go to a wastewater treatment plant is the water that comes down drains out of houses. But in old communities like Iowa City or Mount Vernon, you have a lot of old pipes, some of which are ceramic, and they've cracked, and tree roots have gotten in there and pried them open even further. So whenever it rains, it's not just the water from our homes that's going to the wastewater treatment plant. It's all of this excess rainwater that's soaking in. And under normal rains, they can handle it. But when you get really, really, really long periods of pouring rain, like we get once in a while, and the rivers are flooding, it just overwhelms the wastewater plant. And so rather than penalize the communities for that, oftentimes the DNR just grants waivers and allows them to just dump this stuff into the streams, knowing that it's not up to snuff, but there's nothing they can do about it. So one of the things that Iowa City is doing, and they just did it in front of my house actually, the sewer in front of my house was probably put in not long after the house. My house was built in the mid to late 1900 or 1800s, and they dug up this ancient old clay pipe out there that had, you know, probably been there for 130 years, and it was just all beat to hell. And, you know, then they put in these brand new plastic pipes that are actually sealed.
Yeah, I think Des Moines has I don't taste it because I've drank it for so long, but apparently it has a bad taste because of all the treatment it has to go through with all the runoff into the Raccoon River and such.
So Des Moines is an interesting case. There was a lawsuit filed by the Des Moines Waterworks because basically what they were arguing was there's so much nitrate coming from farmlands, from fertilizer, that ends up in the river, which is the place that they get their water for the community of Des Moines, that they were paying exorbitant amounts of money to clean the nitrate out so that they could then give it to their consumers. So they basically tried to sue the state to say, you've got to compensate us somehow for the extra money we have to spend because the farmers are screwing up the river water. And I think it went to the state Supreme Court. Might have gone beyond that, but the Des Moines Waterworks lost the case. But you know, this goes back a little bit to one of the readings. I hope I asked you guys to read this. If not, we'll do it again. But the hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. Did I ask you to read that one? No? Yes? No? I thought I meant to. Maybe not. Okay. Well, one of the really interesting consequences of all this agriculture around the world has been that, you know, well, let me back up a little bit. So in the 19th century, there were no modern fertilizers. And so, you know, people were putting manure on their fields and rotating crops and doing what they could. But it was with the advent of the Haber process. This guy, Fritz Haber, figured out how to take nitrogen and create ammonia with it, which is what you see being sprayed on farm fields all the time. It's a very energy intensive process, but it basically radically increases the yields of farmlands. And so there was this 20th century explosion in the productivity of farmlands, due largely to this ability to synthesize the chemicals, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium, that sort of thing that these crops need. And as well as improvements in the, you know, like growing corn and wheat that are more drought tolerant and all that stuff. But fertilizer was a huge part of it. Well, a lot of that fertilizer, of course, doesn't get absorbed by the plants. Some of it runs off and makes its way into the rivers. And when it washes down to the Gulf of Mexico, it spawns these algal blooms. And when the algae die, and this happens in ponds and happens in lakes, it happens all over, but the big area is at the mouths of rivers all over the world. When this stuff sinks to the bottom, all this organic matter sinking to the bottom, it reacts with any oxygen that's there. The oxygen starts reacting with the organic matter to break it down. And that basically deoxygenates the bottom water. So organisms that are living in, you know, like the crabs and the clams and all that stuff that would normally be living on the bottom waters off the Gulf of Mexico, off the Mississippi Delta, they die. And these are called hypoxic zones. And they're enormous. The biggest one in the world is just off of the Mississippi. And actually the state of Iowa plays an unusually high role. When you look at the total land area that drains into the Mississippi, that drains down to the Gulf of Mexico, Iowa is actually a very, very small part, but it's an incredibly high percentage of, it supplies an incredibly high percentage of the nitrogen that causes the hypoxic zone. So just like the guys in the Des Moines Waterworks tried to sue the state over the extra cost they had endured, I keep waiting. Someday, maybe it'll happen. I just don't understand the law well enough. For the shrimp farmers and the crab farmers and the fishermen and everybody that have made a living in the Gulf of Mexico to sue Iowa and Wisconsin and Illinois and Nebraska, Minnesota, because their livelihoods have been negatively impacted by all the excess nitrogen runoff from our states. All right, I meant to have assigned that. I guess I didn't. I did assign, though, an orange river runs through it, right? And the Bangladesh arsenic paper, right? Yes? Sydney? Sydney, can you hear me? Sydney, hello? Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes.
So what was your favorite? Tell us a little bit about the Orange River Runs Through It paper.
I actually didn't get to reading that. I was doing my my paper.
Okay, Maya, tell us about the Orange River Runs Through It paper.
It was looking at acidic mine drainage in Colorado, like Golden, Colorado, and Clear Creek.
Uh-huh.
And the author was talking to a water chemistry specialist. And so they were looking at how like the explosions that were used to create the mine had like put dangerous metals that were like saved in pyrites, and so even after the mines were closed, they were emitting acidic drainage.
Yeah, and pick on somebody else, Natalie. Why is the water coming out of these drainage, out of these tunnels or these mines so acidic? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I'm kind of glitching, but it's like all of the mines are draining into this one place, so it's like the acidity is very built up.
But why are they acidic in the first place?
The explosions that they used.
No. Tiff, why is the water so acidic?
The water is acidic because of the materials that are dissolved into the water, like the metals and stuff.
Yeah. What in my lecture about this, what did I say is the big source of the problem a lot of times? Crystal, what about you? Why is this water so acidic?
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll stop talking about these. You guys need to read the papers. So read this and read the Bangladesh paper, and then read the one which I thought I posted, but if I haven't, I will, which is called Gulf Hypoxia. And we'll talk about those tomorrow, I guess.
I had one question actually.
Yeah.
That was kind of relating to the Orange River one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if that's similar to what happened at the Elizabeth Coppermine Superfund site? I don't know if you know what that is.
I don't know.
Okay, because I know, because that's actually above the like up the river from my house essentially. And I know for a while in the spring the water would actually turn orange when it was running down. So I wonder
Where do
if
you
that's
live?
a similar cause or not.
Vermont?
I live in Vermont.
Vermont, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it certainly could be. I don't know anything about that particular.
I don't remember hearing a reason myself. I was just curious. I was like, well, maybe that's a similar cause.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll stop there. Please read the assigned papers so that we can discuss them. And we will meet again tomorrow at 2. Remember that the papers are due, the Reisner first drafts are due at midnight on Friday, which is 34 hours from now, in my mailbox by midnight Central Time. And that's it. All right, and I'll get videos up for tomorrow's lecture. It might not be until tomorrow morning before they're up. Somebody's going to say something.
Ron, could you answer the question I put in the chat? Sorry.
What would
There
happen
should
if
be a
the power
little
to go out in the
pop-up.
water treatment process? Yeah, that's a good question. So in Mount Vernon, at least, a lot of it is driven by gravity. So they generally try to put the wastewater plants at the lowest point so that the water just drains out of the hills and goes down. In which case, if you have a, I mean, I guess, well, first of all, they have auxiliary power, right? But getting the water to the wastewater plant is largely done by gravity. There are a couple of places in Mount Vernon where they actually have to use a pump station to pump it up and over the hill and back down. But for the most part, it just drains. And then, you know, the biggest thing that's going on that's energy demanding, that's demanding energy in the wastewater plants is probably driving the pumps that blow the oxygen into the tanks. But other than that, it's a pretty efficient process. All right. See you guys. See you tomorrow.